What is going on YouTube? Gabins here and welcome to the 12th episode of the Tech Pills weekly live stream. Hope everyone's doing alright. So let's jump on to the first news of today, and this is less of a news and more of an announcement. I was featured in episode 163 of the Destination Linux podcast. So first of all, I want to thank all of you guys, Ryan, Michael, and of course Noah, for having me with you. It was definitely a blast. I had lots of fun recording the episode with you and chatting with you. And so if you're curious, you want to check it out, I'll leave a link in the chat right now. And you can also find it at destinationlinux.network. It's where the network is at. And of course you can just find it on YouTube if you search for Destination Linux. So let's jump to the first actual news of today. Ubuntu 20.04 Focal Fossa released the official wallpaper that they're going to ship, and this time they're also including the source files for the SVG. Let me actually show you the wallpaper itself. There you have it. So this is the new wallpaper, image courtesy of Ubuntu, as you can see here from the watermark. What can I say? It's a fossa, which is a kind of big cat. And I'm not particularly fond of this design here. Not that it's bad or anything, but I just think that it could use some work, some rework. And fortunately, this time around, the developers and the designers behind Ubuntu, and in particular the design team of the Ubuntu wallpapers, released the source files for this wallpaper. Mostly, I'm talking about the SVG, and it's available for to download on the Ubuntu Discourse. I'll just leave a link in a while in the chat for you to check it out. So you can download the SVG for the big cat picture, and also you also have like the backgrounds, just the blank backgrounds with different resolutions and color combinations, so you can tweak the design and make it your own. And if you like it better any other way, you can just go ahead and change that to your liking. And that's what I actually did. I just wanted to play around with it, and that's what I came up with. And as you see, it's pretty much the same thing. I'm not 100% convinced with the black eyes. Maybe if I just made them the color of the background. By the way, this background is just filler. And I also shortened the whiskers here, because I just don't like these long whiskers. In my opinion, they just don't look that good. And also, one other thing that I changed is that I slightly tweaked the direction, and also, as you can see, the eyes are a little bit different. I don't like this black and white eye design, mostly because it's too cartoonish in my opinion for what they're trying to accomplish here. And also these shooting lasers or whatever they are, I don't particularly like them, so I just removed them. And as you can see, I didn't spend too much time on it. I just wanted to play around with it. So if you want to check it out, you can just download all of the files from the Again, from the Ubuntu discourse. I'll leave a link in the chat right now. So, for the next news of today, a new vulnerability has been found in Intel CPUs, affecting 9th gen and older processors. Now, this vulnerability was discovered by the researchers over at Positive Technologies, and to be honest, it's just another vulnerability to add to the long list of Intel vulnerabilities that we're all now aware of. And this vulnerability is apparently unfixable with a firmware change, with a firmware update. So there's that. Apparently, all that can be done up to this point is limit the possibility of this vulnerability to be actually exploited. And of course, up to this point, AMD CPUs are apparently unaffected. And also, one other thing is that this vulnerability apparently requires either local or physical access to the machine in order to be exploited. So it's not that worrying, but it's still pretty worrying. And to be honest, these are really embarrassing times for Intel. Apart from the whole 10 nanometer fiasco that they're still living to this day, most of the hardware related vulnerabilities that have been discovered in these recent years are still unfixed, even with several generations and hardware revisions later. So I don't know how much work fixing them in hardware would require, and apparently it would require some actual re-engineering of core components, because again, many hardware revisions later, we still haven't got this fixed. And my microphone is clipping, so let me just lower the volume here a little bit. Hope it's better. So again, the fact that this is a vulnerability that affects Intel CPUs, I don't know if it's because of Intel having an inferior architecture, but to be fair, at this point, it's still a possibility that despite the AMD's market share increasing, Intel, well, it still has the bigger slice of the x86 market, including desktop, laptops, and servers. So of course they have more exposure, and therefore it's more likely that security researchers like the guys over at Positive Technologies focus their attention on the Intel architecture specifically. So this probably is part of the reason why we're hearing lots of vulnerabilities being discovered on the Intel platform specifically. At this point, it's not even fun anymore. And as an owner of Intel CPUs, I don't like the direction that these vulnerabilities are going. I think that this all has to do with the various optimizations that have been done in hardware to the architecture over the years to squeeze as much performance as possible out of existing technology. So hopefully this will be fixed at some point, all of these problems. But at this point, in 2020, what I can tell you, if you're planning on an upgrade, go AMD for your CPU, or go with a different architecture altogether if you can. I'd keep an eye on newer ARM architectures, particularly the Pinebook, if you're interested. It's a very interesting option if you don't require too much power. And also, if you want if you have some workstation tasks that you need to do on your daily job or with your computer, you can also maybe possibly try the Power 9 architecture by IBM, which is a lot more open source friendly and open in nature compared to x86. So there's even that option. Otherwise, if you need x86, and you will most likely need x86 for most of your normal tasks, I think your best bet as of right now is going with AMD. Moving on to the next news of today, Lattedock adds new features in their new development release. So, if you're not aware, Lattedock is an add-on for the Plasma desktop that, well, it's basically a dock that's implied in the name, but it's also very configurable, and it can also act as a panel. And it's very similar in behavior to your standard Plasma panels, so it can also be seen as an alternative to those. And in their new development release, 0.10 tilde, as they're calling it, this popular dock add-on is adding a new feature with on-demand sidebars. And they're basically just panels that can show or hide, as well the name implies, on demand, with a dedicated keyboard shortcut or a button on a visible panel. So this is very useful to make like sidebars for your notifications, or for some widgets that you want to be able to access without having them constantly on your desktop. So for instance, in the video demo, they showed a music player control widget, as well as well, you can put an analog clock in there, or your notifications, or whatever you want, really. That's one of the great things about Plasma. It's very customizable, and you are able to do such things with the included widgets and with third-party widgets, so you can adapt your experience to best suit you. And to be honest, I'm really happy to see these kind of improvements in a very nice project as Lattedock. And to be honest, Lattedock is really one of those little pieces of software that really makes me want to try KDE Plasma more and more, despite how I like things, despite the fact that my workflow is deeply embedded into the GNOME desktop environment. Anyway, great work to the Lattedock guys, and I hope to keep seeing this project moving forward. Moving on to the next news of today, OBS releases version 25 release candidate. So this is a pretty big release apparently. If you're familiar with the OBS streaming software, it's what I'm actually using right now to record this show. It's a free and open source streaming and recording software with very advanced options, and it's lately really it's been going really strong, with many important sponsors donating to the project and supporting these very nice free and open source software that everyone in the community can actually use and enjoy. So with release candidate 25, with version 25 release candidate, they're adding a new Vulkan game capture feature. So this feature should allow you to, well, capture the Vulkan render output directly without having to actually get through the compositor and record the screen on your operating system. And this could possibly lead to reducing the capture overhead. So that's great news, particularly if you're using the same PC for game streaming and actual gaming at the same time. They're also now including the possibility to output using the Secure Reliable Transport Protocol, shortened SRT. This is a protocol made to be able to stream multimedia content through the network securely using encryption. So this could be very useful if you're using like a third-party service to stream to multiple platforms at the same time, say YouTube and Twitch. And in general, it's a good addition for more complex use cases of OBS. It also includes scene collection import from different software. So you can now import your scenes from OBS Classic, XSplit, and Streamlabs OBS. So this is great if you're migrating from another tool, and of course, I think you should be migrating to standard OBS because, well, that's where the money is at, and that's where most of the attention is nowadays as far as streaming goes, and where most of the investment is. As well as, of course, it's an open source solution, it's free, and it's probably always gonna be there in the future. It's probably never gonna die, and you can't say the same thing about the other solutions out there, particularly XSplit and Streamlabs OBS. Another very nice addition that I'm really glad they included in this latest version is they implemented the browser plugin on Linux. And well, I can tell you this is particularly useful if you're if you're like me, using web sources for stuff like custom web-based animations or interactive content like chat or notifications on screen. This is really awesome because if you probably don't know my workflow with OBS, but my current scene collection is heavily reliant on, well, not heavily, but it does rely on a couple of web views. And the way I'm implementing that right now is that I have a custom script that spawns custom Firefox windows, and with scripted window resizing and custom window capture sources inside of OBS with very finely tuned cropping. And I know that this is not really a stable setup, and at some point I'll have to tweak it, and at some point it will just break because either the script is gonna fail or changes in theming in both Firefox and my desktop environment can mess it up. So honestly, it's just a big mess, and I can't wait to use a cleaner, proper solution like a proper browser plugin. So moving on to the next news of today, Firefox lands WebGL acceleration in Wayland. So GPU acceleration support on Firefox has been kind of spotty, particularly on Linux. It hasn't really always worked. It really depends on how you have your Firefox configured, and overall the support for it isn't really all that great. So in Firefox 75, we're finally getting proper GPU accelerated WebGL content and video playback under Wayland. So this is great news for the Wayland ecosystem, making it one step closer to being ready for mass adoption. And if you want to try it for yourself, if you're using Wayland, you can just grab the latest version of Firefox Nightly. That's the development version with the latest changes. Of course, it's not going to be 100% stable as your normal Firefox is, but if you want to play around with the new features, you can install it alongside your standard Firefox. And you just have to enable the widget.wayland-dmabuff webgl.enabled flag in the about column config page in Firefox. And speaking of Wayland, when I was guest hosting the episode 163 of Essential Linux, one question that I got from the guys got via email was, what's the status of Wayland? And I just thought I could bring this topic here too, because it's really quite an interesting discussion. And the viewer was asking particularly on the status of Wayland with not much detail on the question itself. And as an overview of the current status of Wayland, what I can tell you is that everyone's really trying hard and working on it, as these latest news about Firefox also shows, because it's really going to be the future of the Linux desktop for every desktop environment out there. Of course, there are some that are already implemented. Mainly GNOME has great support for Wayland, and Plasma has kept working on it as well. And also there are other window managers and desktop environments out there, namely the Sway window manager that are Wayland native. So of course, there's lots of interest in the project, lots of interest in this new technology. And also, one other very nice thing that has been going on for greater Wayland adoption out there is that the Mir the Mir display server has now been converted to being a Wayland compositor, so that desktop environments like XFC, Mate, or LXQt can now use Mir as their compositor instead of having to re-implement their whole window manager to actually support Wayland, which is a great thing. And of course, it removes a lot of work from the shoulders of the desktop environment developers. The biggest problems right now that are affecting Wayland have to do with the fact that, of course, it's built to be more secure compared to Xorg, and this more security and sandboxing of the whole desktop experience makes things like screen recording and screen sharing, as well as remote control, kind of, I don't want to say difficult, but of course they're more challenging, because Xorg has been designed initially from the ground up to be a okay, sorry, I messed up there. Xorg, sorry, was meant from the beginning to be a remotely usable display server, so that you have like a central server somewhere and a client somewhere else that can just connect to the server using the X protocol. So this is not what's going on with Wayland. Wayland is just a protocol for a display server, and it doesn't implement any of those remote features. So of course, sharing the desktop and sharing the screen, recording the screen are all tasks that have to be implemented in the compositor instead of the display server itself. So Catman 19,000 asks in the chat, okay, he says, Wayland is gonna be so cool, is Mir like Compton? And so is Mir like Compton? Not really. Mir started as an alternative display server to both Xorg and Wayland back when Ubuntu was working on the Ubuntu Phone project. So I really don't know why they didn't go with Wayland in the first place, but they decided that they wanted their own display server, which is, I don't know, it wasn't the best idea, the brightest idea in my opinion, but they went with it. And as they abandoned the Ubuntu Touch and the Ubuntu Phone project, they just converted Mir to being a compositor for Wayland. And in Wayland, when you say compositor, you're basically saying both compositor and window manager. And as I mentioned before, I mentioned Sway before. I said it's a window manager, and while it's true, the more correct and more accurate definition of Sway is actually a compositor for Wayland. So it's a slight change of terms, but just do an alias in your head: compositor equals window manager, as far as the conversation goes. But the point is that in Wayland, compositors have to do much of the heavy lifting that Xorg has traditionally been doing. Catman also asks, gaming on Wayland is very bad, and I've heard a lot of issues with NVIDIA. So I was going to touch on that. Thank you for the comment. So gaming on Wayland, I don't think it's bad, because there's no real way to game natively on Wayland unless the game supports it. But for most games out there, what happens is that an X-Wayland window is created. So X-Wayland is basically an X server contained in a window inside of Wayland. So you're still using Xorg to game on Wayland in most cases. And while that mostly works, there are some cases where it doesn't. Namely, the Binding of Isaac Rebirth has some issues where it just doesn't launch on Wayland. So there's that. I'm sure there are other games, and also one other thing is that when gaming on Wayland. Sometimes, again, it's very dependent on the game that you're trying to run. There are some performance issues, but you probably have to take into account both the GPU that you're using and how well it's supported inside of Wayland, as well as how the game behaves inside of Wayland. So it's mostly of a hit or miss experience, but in my personal experience, it's mostly doable. Since I switched to my current RX 5700 XT graphics card from AMD, I've been using Wayland extensively with GNOME and Sway, and I can tell you that most games actually work pretty well. There are some exceptions though. And one of the nice things in Wayland, by the way, is that apparently screen tearing is not an issue there. I don't know why, I don't know what's going on there, but if you're suffering from screen tearing in Xorg, you're probably not gonna experience any of that in Wayland. I think it's because it's based on newer technologies and they're thinking ahead about these issues, so they're just the fixes, I mean, are just kind of baked in. That's at least what I think. And you also asked Catman that you've heard about a lot of issues with NVIDIA. And yes, I mean, NVIDIA is not really supported, or well, NVIDIA doesn't really want to support Wayland the proper way. There are different implementations of how a graphics driver can interact with Wayland. And there's a standard way, the Mesa way, and then there's the NVIDIA way. They just decided that they didn't want to support, that NVIDIA just decided they didn't want to support the standard for the Wayland protocol, and instead they implemented this new protocol based on something called EGL streams. I'm not probably the best person to ask about this. You can search it for yourself. Just search EGL streams NVIDIA Wayland, and you'll find most of the technical details that you may be interested in. Anyway, the point is that since this different method of interacting with Wayland developed by NVIDIA is, first of all, not standard, so NVIDIA is the only one using this method because they invented it and because they didn't want to support the standard, and also because it's apparently inferior to what the standard currently is. What happens is that you can kind of run Wayland with NVIDIA GPUs with compositors that support EGL streams, and those include, I think, GNOME and Plasma currently, and that's it. I could be wrong on that, don't quote me on that. The experience is really subpar with heavy lagging and bad performance and high resource usage, so it's basically an unusable experience. And again, I think this is a fault of NVIDIA, and some people, in particular the guys over at Destination Linux, said that this could be detrimental to the Wayland, to mass adoption for Wayland. And to some degree, I think they're right, because of course there's still many people that like NVIDIA GPUs, or that already have NVIDIA GPUs, and in some cases there's not even a choice, because depending on what you're working on, if you need something like CUDA or the NVENC encoder, you just don't have a choice but use an NVIDIA graphics card. And of course, if you want to use an NVIDIA graphics card, at least at this point, Wayland is a no-go option. This said, what I think is going to happen is that Wayland development will keep going forward, as it is going forward step by step. And there's really a lot of work going on for it in GNOME, in Plasma, and in the wider Linux community as well. And at some point, NVIDIA is just going to be left out of the new features, left out of the latest stuff that is out for Linux. And I think that at some point they will just have to admit defeat, and they will just have to implement the new protocol. But that's just my opinion. I I don't know if that's actually what's going to happen. I hope that's what's going to happen. And honestly, I hope that NVIDIA just wakes up and starts working more with upstream, as far as, at least as far as Linux goes, because so far they've been doing what they've always been doing, and that's trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to find non-standard solutions to already solved problems. And that's what they're doing with CUDA, that's what they're doing with G-Sync, and that's what they're doing with, well, PhysX historically, and many other technologies that are that they develop in-house. So again, Catman says that that's way too many layers for gamers to get their heads around. Okay, yeah, it is, but at the same time, I don't think you should think about it. I think that the gamer and, well, a normal user really shouldn't think about these things, and I don't think they need to. If you're I don't know, if you're a nerd or a geek about these things, you can learn more about it and increase your knowledge about these topics. But really, if all you want to do with your computer is open a browser and play some games, you should really use whatever your distribution ships by default, and I think that's the best solution overall. If you like, on the contrary, if you like to play around with new things and with potentially unstable technology, I think it's not a bad idea to play around with Wayland and play around with the latest stuff. So it's really up to the user, up to the preference, and that's one of the greatest things about Linux. We always have the choice. If you don't wanna hear about it, if you don't wanna get too deep into it, you really don't have to. All right, guys, I think this is going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the Tech Pills Weekly live stream. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone who joined live. Remember to like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more. And sorry for the sun, by the way. I have to lower the curtains or something next time. Anyway, join the Tech Pills community at techpills.technology/community, or use one of the QR codes by the side, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one.